Howdy there, and welcome back. Thanks for joining us for part 2 of structuring the Writer's Workshop within the secondary ELA classroom. Just to quickly review the traditional structure of the Writer's Workshop, we have talked about the mini lesson and the class status. We're about to move into the writing time and then sharing time to complete our specific series on the structures. Okay, so we move towards the writing time, the independent writing time, which at the secondary level you're really looking at 20 to 45 minutes of authentic writing practice for these students and interactive feedback sessions from the teacher. So this is probably the hardest component of the Writer's Workshop because it is intense for the student and for the teacher. It's authentic, it's raw, it's real. It's seemingly improvised for them because they're trying to figure out where to go, and although you've planned for the structures and you've planned for the organizations, you haven't planned for Victor sitting in front of you and realizing that he's struggling with an issue that you may not necessarily have something to just suggest. So, and that's what's beautiful about it. It's very authentic, but it's also what is scary about it, because you have to rely on structures and procedures to have it look and feel smooth. So the teacher is going to set and review workshop expectations. You're going to be providing the resources at each of the stations so that they are independent and not relying on you, because you're going to be busy doing other stuff and having a hand up because they need a graphic organizer or a checklist or a procedure for something. It's not going to allow you to focus on the other components. You yourself may be participating on actively writing in your own journal, maybe writing an essay yourself, responding to the prompt yourself, modeling good writing. You may be checking on students' progress, walking around, looking at their checklists, scanning the room to see visually where they're working on. Maybe they have a colored coding paper on their desk, maybe they're in a certain section of the room. But most importantly, you will be conferencing with students, and you will be leading small group support. This is where the beauty and the magic of the workshop lies. The immediate feedback that you're able to provide to students, the differentiated support that you're able to provide through conferences and through small group support. You thought you were busy. Students themselves are even busier. This is, again, a very painful, a vulnerable, a raw experience for them. They document a writing goal and create their daily agenda for that day. They complete a certain number of tasks or prompts for the week or the unit. They may be able to choose the prompt or the mode or the purpose, or you may actually assign a required prompt, but then the rest are up to them. They will be showing evidence of the writing process because we need to understand the final products, and because we need students to understand the value of the process, they need to be practicing the process. That's the whole point of the workshop to begin with. They will be using available resources and handouts and checklists and organizers and forms that you make available to them. They will be following the established procedures and rules. They will be keeping up with all of their work in some kind of folder, either tangibly or digitally. And they may be involved themselves in some kind of small group, some kind of conference with a teacher, or peer conference with each other. So they're busy. The success of this independent writing time relies so heavily, again, on the established procedures and the rules. That is why it is so important that those mini lessons, anchor charts that you have used and relied on to review the process, the procedures, are displayed somewhere in the classroom so there's no excuse. This is what's expected at this time, because you're not going to be available right then and there to hold their hand and make sure they're following every single step. You're going to be monitoring, but it's going to be right time for them. beautiful, beautiful thing about 21st century learning is that we do have access to and beautiful marriage of the technological components available through the Google Classroom, for example, that help us organize and help us really facilitate the type of learning environment that is necessitated for the Writer's Workshop. So if you have some Google Chromes, some iPads, and so forth, really think about how you can incorporate the Writer's Workshop using that digital media. Google Docs, for example, within the Google Classroom, you are able to create and organize digital portfolios for students. You're able to facilitate peer feedback, track revisions of essays. You can even leave students audio and videos as feedback or as reminders of tasks. You can link online resources or share documents like their daily agenda checklists or a graphic organizer for a specific mode of writing they're doing. And if you really and firmly believe they still need to be writing on paper, which sometimes I do, I would require students to write their initial draft on paper where I could visually track and visually see what they're working on. But then have them actually go on the computer and write their essay. Remember, word processing is actually one of the 11 best practices for writing instruction, achievement, and learning. So having them actually type out their essay, sharing it through a Google Doc with friends, with groups, with teachers, with peers, and so forth, will allow them the ability to also interact with it digitally, but still keep their the practice of the process. If you need some more support or help in creating and setting up your Google Classroom that would allow for easy implementation of the Writer's Workshop, contact Elizabeth King, who is a wonderful resource when it comes to Google Classrooms. She is our digital learning specialist, or one of them, and she will be more than happy to help you and your team or even campus set that up. Okay. We will be, before we move on, addressing the concepts of conferencing and small group instruction in a later topic within the module. So for now, we're moving forward and talking about sharing the writing. Asking students to actually share their writing can be a really powerful component of the Writer's Workshop, but it can also be very detrimental depending on how it's done, who it's done with, and what is shared. So having students just share a sentence, a paragraph, or even an entire essay, depending on what you want to celebrate. Maybe sharing a strong example of a writing, especially as it was related to the mini lesson that day. It was extremely powerful. Sharing a revision that was made after peer or conference that was had. So had students actually share your experience with the revision process. Maybe sharing a struggle or a success or a proud moment. Sharing orally, or maybe feature their writing in a document camera, on the board somewhere, on sentence strips. Maybe having students write their favorite sentence or a good example of a complex sentence on their desk or on some kind of construction paper or butcher paper, and then having a little mini gallery walk where students walk around and provide feedback is considered an excellent sharing time. Students can share during the class to the whole class, or to a small group, or to just a partner, or even just a teacher. And teachers will also and should also be sharing their writing as well, especially if they were involved in the modeling for that day. You want to be able to elicit some kind of feedback and celebrate specific writing triumphs. So after someone shares, ask a question like, what did so-and-so do? What did you notice about the description in that paragraph? What did you notice about that thesis? Notice how it really captures the audience and it tells us what it's going to be about and what direction the essay is going. Will someone else come to the board and look at this thesis? Maybe label the different parts of that thesis. Where's your topic? Where's your position? What are your general reasons? Maybe even having a conversation with a student saying, hey, will you write that topic sentence on the post-it note? I really want to talk about it my next class, if that's okay with you. create some kind of all-star wall, for example, where they share stellar sentences or pieces. They can use index cards, sentence strips, post-it notes, or even larger post-it notes. These examples will function as revision support for other essays or even other students. And they will highlight student ownership and build confidence in students. And they'll start thinking of themselves as writers and eventually authors, because that's really what the Writer's Workshop is designed to do, create the habit of writing. Tips for sharing, pretty important here. This is where you really have to rely on knowing your students. Some are comfortable sharing, you know who they are. Some are not. And I would even say some are too comfortable sharing that maybe shouldn't be sharing every single time. So you have to know your students, what they want to share and how they want to share, or if they want to share. Okay, so it's one thing to celebrate students' efforts and share their efforts and their accomplishments, but it's another thing when you're sharing their work as a non-example, or maybe sharing evidence of a struggle that has happened. This is, of course, a very touchy and dicey topic at the secondary level, because you're dealing with writers who are already frustrated and already think that they cannot write. So for you to use their writing as a non-example is really going to be a hurtful thing for a lot of students who don't feel confident already. So how do you have this conversation? You have to be careful how you approach these kids. Here's an example of something that I may have done when very quietly I would be talking to a student, and I would say something like, "Hey, this prompt was actually a really hard one. I can't believe you were able to do this much with it. Awesome. So do you mind if I share your example thesis with everyone so that we can revise it together? Because it was really hard for everyone to write a thesis to this prompt. But I'm glad that you attempted it. I won't tell anyone that it's yours, and it's actually going to be pretty cool because we get to revise it together, so you won't have to revise it after we're done with it. So kind of think about it, let me know what you think, and then we'll go from there. No pressure." So just a conversation like that. It wasn't demeaning. It wasn't necessarily what they did wrong. It was a need that I had because the prompt happened to be difficult. It wasn't that their writing was a non-example and it was a negative conversation. So think about those types of approaches. As we talked about, have an area in the room where you celebrate good writing, either post-it notes for sentences or a wall for actual essays. Here is an example of students sharing each something positive about their writing for the day. Okay, so the last few minutes are dedicated to the traditional cycle versus the alternate cycle. We've already talked about the 4 different components that make the Writer's Workshop, but as you get better and as your students really practice each of these structures, it will be acceptable, if not needed, that you alternate these cycles. Perhaps you don't need a mini lesson that day. Perhaps it's okay that you don't even have a share session for the day because you can maximize your independent writing time. Sometimes it's okay to start with your sharing session first and then move to class status and then go ahead and have your writing time. One of my favorites is a share session, then a mini lesson. Perhaps that share session leads to a mini lesson, then your class status and your writing time. Once you begin alternating, however, you're really going to be confusing kids and their procedure. So it's important that you definitely establish consistency to begin with. Know the rules before you can break them.